Today, the topic is what you see in the screen, but the inherent topic is about our data-driven operating model, how we put that in action. And to give you an idea of who we are, I am Kalol. I lead out the data and automation ambition teams inside Spark and its subsidiaries. And this is Nick, who is the data product owner, as well as the chapter lead for commercial data. As you can see, we are true to our attire, as you see in the screen. That's what we wear. So you get what you see. So who are Spark? Spark, we are from New Zealand. We are the largest telecom provider. We provide mobile, broadband, managed data services. But we are also a digital company. We provide cloud, data analytics, telephony, as well as digital transformation services to all of New Zealand. Now, our purpose is to help all of New Zealand win big in digital world. And if you see our purpose and where we are somewhere between Australia and Antarctica. So there is a constraint of talent as well as capital and resources. And what we will see today is the story of how we manage to go around taking this ambition into reality while working through the constraints we faced. So this was 2020. Not 3-4 years in current timelines is an age. So at that point, if you take one area of business marketing, so the cost of customer acquisition was increasing. There was high churn. Telecom environments can be very competitive. And we couldn't buy out of the problem because there was pressure on marketing budgets. So what we would try to do is find segments of customers. So we did customer segmentation and profiling, but the segmentation as such means that in the bell curve, there are people on the two tails of the segment who do not fit the segment profile. So that was essentially not meaningful for them. So they would not pick up that message or engage with it. So that led to, let's solve that problem by sending more messages, which would solve some of them will stick. And the problem was that the people who were earlier receiving messages, they had too much of them and sort of the message overload creeped in. So in terms of our technology stack, we had in data, we had an IBM DB2 machine working on P series. Nothing wrong with that. It's just that it's very difficult to change and manage it, especially the talent and the skills to manage it is also getting difficult. So we wanted to solve it. We were doing is we bought a lot of tools on top to solve for them. The problem for buying tools on top is that then it requires multiple training and handoffs to manage them. So to deal with that, we would then create one of B-scope solutions top so as to manage the multiple tools. So in a sense, there was a little bit of everything and clutter. And at that point of time, something changed. What changed was telcos do this strategy, at least Spark does this strategy in 3-year timelines. So at that point, there was a strategy refresh. And the question was, how can we make data a source of sustainable competitive advantage? What does it need to do? And the leadership team as well as board were really bought into that fact that this can be a source of a sustainable competitive advantage. And then we embarked on this journey, and 3 years from now, what we will show you where we reached in 3 angles: the technology stack, transformation, the people, and the operating model change. As we are in the Snowflake conference, we will start with the technology stack. So I learned a new word today from Frank, unsilo. So we probably did the same. We had to break the silos. So data doesn't work well with silos. It becomes no source of truth. So we started breaking the silos. Now that's a difficult process in a telco because we have not only core telco, there are subsidiaries. So we are still going through this process, but We have gone through most of it. And when we break the silos, we moved into a cloud-based data architecture. Now, if you look at the 4 layers of it, we started with the ingestion layer. So that should capture the structured data, unstructured data, but also we had a lot of real-time data. So we used change data capture technology to create a view of the transactional systems so as to create a near real-time view of some of the data sources we need. And then there was a choice of what do you do with all that data? And we had this view to create a unified data platform. And we kept true to the word unified. So Snowflake, we chose Snowflake. We were one of the first in the region to pick up Snowflake at that point of time. But we wanted Snowflake to do all of it. So Snowflake is our data warehouse. Snowflake is our data lake. Snowflake is our operational data store. And in fact, Snowflake is also the feature store of our models. So Snowflake is the unification of all the data in one place. And that enabled us in a business sense to create views of the customer. So we created a customer view, and then we stitched customers together in their households to create a household view, which enables us to create household propositions. Now we have also stitched customers together in SMEs together to create a small and medium enterprise view and another an enterprise view. So all these views are created because we got the data sources together in one place. Now, once we have the data, that's where sort of the magic comes in terms of AI, machine learning models to extract value out of data. And we built sort of propensity models in terms of, you take marketing use cases, identifying the right customer for the right offer. And this was a philosophy change from the earlier messaging concept was, can we find the right customer at the right time who are in the market rather than sending messages to everyone? That meant that we had to find the 1 to 2% in the market at any point of time rather than go to the rest. So we had to figure out, for example, who has devices who are old and has a lot of data need, and they might be needing a device rather than send a message to him. So there are multiple use cases like that. So those models essentially then created recommendations which surfaced in our user interface. And we invested in APIs because we wanted this to connect to our IT systems so as to surface the insight. And that is very important because the insight to action layer creates the value and the action is in the IT layer. Obviously, while we did this, we had to build other capabilities on the side to manage this 4-layer architecture. So we invested in an enterprise data catalog so that the data comes together, which was in Alation. We invested and partnered with Monte Carlo, which is a solution which helps to keep data reliable. And then we have partnered with Arise for model observability. So the combined view is our view of what the data architecture of future should look like. Now, there is a generative AI part to this because generative AI is coming up. Our feel is the data architecture doesn't change because we still need the data in a unified way. It assists us in building additional capabilities to surface the insights as well as the models for our customers in a more intuitive way. Now, the next part of once we did the technology was the operating mode. Now, we started with a service model, which is built as business says. So nothing wrong with it. It is fast to start, but the problem is there is a lot of bespoke capabilities you build. So what we then thought about is, can we change that context to build usable products? Now, product has more effort to start with, but gives us a much better return on the effort because in product, you have a strategy, you have a backlog, you have a team, and you have a KPI to measure. But once we move to the product model, our conversation inside Spark changed from being a cost center to data teams being measured on the return on investment on EBITDA or revenue increase. And that sort of changed how we are looked in Spark. So previously, we were sort of the backstreet drivers. We will give reactive reports and sort of accuracy of reporting, one of the key measures of success. That changed to being the front seat, not the driver's seat. The driver's seat is still with the business, with their problems, but we are sort of the co-pilot for the driver to help them with insights, prediction, so as to solve the problems and opportunities for business in various bits. Now, with that operating model, we sort of, if you double click on the data product approach, we started invested in building customer experiences. So we added UI, UX capabilities in developing data products. We invested in CI/CD and DevOps capabilities in development so that there is a continuous improvement lifecycle in our products. And we created APIs and connections so that the technology interacts with the rest of the IT stack really well. Interestingly, even not servicing the immediate needs of the business, but building it in a sort of product way, it increased adoption in business by at least 50%. The teams were happier. We could see the ENPS increase because they can see a future in what they are building. And the useful life was much higher because of the way we build product and the use of it. Now, with that data product approach, to be given an example is Brain. Brain is a full form coined by a squad who built it, was build robust AI for next best action. We built it because once we had a lot of propensity models, we can't manage that because there were so many recommendations it could create. So the Brain was something which orchestrates and brings it together so as to find the right message for the right customer. And this was built on a digital twin architecture. Now, digital twin is generally thought as a digital view of the physical world. What we essentially did was a view of the marketing world. So essentially simulate the sensors, like 5 sensors of us in data, do the decisioning in the brain, and actuators are essentially the technology or MarTech layer in marketing sense. Now, if you double click on what Brain is, it has 4 components. It has an advanced decisioning engine. It has a data unification layer, which brings the 360-degree view of the customer as well as the households. It has machine learning propensity models, which create the recommendations. And very importantly, an end-to-end measurement layer, because the attribution of control groups is very important to answer the finance question of how much value have you really generated. And this doesn't replace any of the platforms we invested in. So it didn't replace the CDPs we invested in, automation analytics software we invested in, or data AI capabilities. As you can see, like many corporates, we invested in multiple tools at the same time. What it did was it orchestrated these together and created an intelligent decisioning on top. Now, this is built on cloud and it has privacy components built in. And now New Zealand privacy laws are similar to GDPR in Europe, was inspired by that. So it has the privacy controls to conform to that. So with this Brain, what results we got? So 3 years after that 2020 slide, we, on an average, now this depends upon types of marketing campaign, we got a 17% uplift in conversions. Now 17% uplift in conversion marketing, sometimes where previous conversions were much lower, was some cases multiple times the usual earlier conversion, sometimes even 10x. While conversions increased, the marketing spend reduced by 16%. So there was a double whammy effect. And that was largely due to the personalization at scale we could do. So right now, we are in a stage that the investment in data capabilities in Brain gives in-year returns. So the cash positive in a year. For example, if you put $1 million into that capability, it will give the $1 million back in a year and much more next year. So there, it's public, like in the, as part of that strategy, we generated around $30-40 million of revenue along with building intuitive journeys to surface this insights to our customer. Now, if you're wondering what Brain does, how does it look, I will hand it over to Nick, who will take you through a demo.
Thank you. So this becomes way more real if we can actually see it. That'll play. So this is the Brain application. So this, when you land in there, there's a real focus on the measurement. So this is all about how are the campaigns showing up, and we track we have much deeper reporting outside of the tool, but in the tool we really track these three statuses of events. So whether something was presented, which is when we've shown something to a customer, whether they were interested, which how we think about that can be different per channel, but essentially in an email might be a click, and lastly accepted or converted. So it's really important for us that we track the trend of these, because if we're seeing, when we're making these predictions, if things go funny, that should show up here pretty quickly. It also gives us a feel for when we make changes to the campaigns, how that's landing for our customers, with the hope that over time, interested and accepted move up. And then we have this concept of actions. So for us, that's kind of groups of campaigns. So you'll see here this Apple device launch, device life cycle, Samsung, so on. Generally focused around kind of points of reconsideration. So if we go in there, so this is sort of the breakdown of how we set our actions, which in this case, like I say, we've got those VAS activations, value-added services, so we sell Spotify and Netflix, so understanding whether our customers are using that. And then we have a number of offers which we can show up with to the customer as part of that offer or that action. So things like a recurring credit or a one-off credit. And I think what we'll go and do next is double click on one of those to give you an idea of what it is. Well, this is what an action is. So for us, it's got a name, it's got a variant, which is generally a combination of channel and content, which has a reference to, for us, Adobe, our offer catalog. It also has these audiences. So in this case, we've pre-built some audiences that we think are likely to buy the iPhone at launch. Be able to set a control size. Again, for us, from an attribution perspective, this is really important because we really focus on uplift versus control rather than the nominal number. And lastly, you've got the ability here to set the relevance threshold. So in a case like a device launch where we might want to talk to more customers than usual, we're able to make that trade-off. So we're able to essentially drop the precision to increase the volume, or vice versa. I click save there. So once you've got your actions, the next bit is really how do we create a view of our customer? So we've got these things we want to serve them. Who is it we're going to talk to? So here we've got, essentially this is a view of our feature store, which has been really useful as well because it's surfaced the feature store in a way that's usable for non-technical users. Previously we would have said, if you want to know what's in the feature store, write a query or look at technical documentation, and inevitably that didn't happen. So we've got here as well, we look at coverage across our base to make sure that we are capturing that feature across at least a good portion of our base if we're going to use it. How many actions it's used on. And we do anomaly detection on the platform as well. So if we look at numbers like falling outside our usual range, it helps us to really focus our data quality efforts. We know we can't fix everything. We know there's a lot of mess. So if we focus on the things that have a high number of actions, that's a good starting point. So once we've built those things, what we do is we actually run the brain, or the decisioning engine. We call it running the brain. So here you land on the screen, you can choose your actions. In this case, we've got, these device ones, same ones. For some reason, we're not running mobile plan recommendations, possibly because we want to talk to customers about devices this week. And then we click run. And because this isn't a live demo, I know it runs. So here you get the results. So we've got 19,000 recommendations from a base of 1.2. So Kalol talked about 1 to 2% of our customers in market at any given time. That sort of fits to that number and what we normally see. We get a breakdown per action. So this is important if we want to get a mix on those portfolios. We might go back and do things like change relevancy if we want to see more in certain groups. And then also the variant level so that we understand what we're doing in terms of content and channel. And then next up, what we'll see is a customer view. So originally what we did this, and this is sort of, was we actually had a manual export to Adobe but it was a sort of this level of information where we would pass through some customer identifier. We had a link to an offer ID, which has the channel content. And then we have a relevancy score, which essentially says how fit is this action for this customer, which is useful, especially when we're creating multiple predictions for a customer, because that determines which one we show, or in an inbound channel or app where we can show multiple offers at the same time, it determines order. And then in the case, for sort of transparency's sake, one of the important things for us is that this isn't a black box. So here we're getting a view of this customer was recommended an iPhone 14 mini. And this is sort of a breakdown of why, or the features that we looked at to make that call. So we see high device purchase propensity, so customers in market for a device. That's a good start. Next, what we see is we have these behavioral traits, which give us some more information about the way the customer acts. And we see ticket options high, so that's probably why in this case we've said actually it's a device launch. These people are more likely to buy at launch rather than, say, 6 months after. And we see that the customer had an iPhone SE, just sort of a upper mid-tier phone, and a smaller handset, which is why we've kind of heroed the Mini rather than the Pro or the normal one. So it just gives us a good view of why we're making these decisions, which is important. And it's helped build a lot of trust with our users. And then once that's happened, we go back to the start, which is we track. So the moment those decisions are made, we start to track presented, interested, accepted, as well as things like churn and understanding the products the customers buy. So how does this show up for our customers? So for our customers, it's really about creating a consistent conversation, that we're not talking about to them about one thing in one channel and then they come into a store and have a totally different conversation. So in this example, we've got this customer, Anna, fictional customer, who's likely to buy a device. She's got an older Samsung and she loves music. So we might send her an email that says, with the older device, maybe the battery's not what it used to be. We could do the same as an SMS. And through our contact centers and stores as well, we're able to surface recommendations to our own agents with some explainability around that as well, so they understand the context for the recommendation, so that they're able to have meaningful conversations. And lastly, in paid and programmatic channels, we're able to kind of, in this case, we talk about a Samsung and we're heroing that's a local Kiwi band because she loves music. So that's what we've kind of talked to there is like what we call our base marketing part of the product. So this has really been, I guess, it's largely a retention focus. So what we're looking at, and this looks like this is year 1, year 2, year 3. We're actually all looking at those now. But what we're looking at is full funnel, what we call full funnel marketing, which is really around our paid channels. So how do we do automated bid weighting depending on the value of customers? And we've already had some initial experiments with that, which have been quite successful, as well as brand and consideration. So largely we're focused now on these moments of conversion or selling, but how do we make sure that we've got a sequence where we go right from an initial brand conversation where we might talk about, say, like the music, or we might do a partnership with a band, and then later we have those conversations around Spotify or music. Next is goal setting and planning optimization. So for us, this is around how do we take business constraints and allow for them when we're doing our planning and when we're doing recommendations. So if the business has, at one time part of the year, we might have like a really big focus on customer retention. At other times, it might be customer growth. So how do you reweight those recommendations to account for changing business priorities and automating that send of those? And lastly, which is, I think everyone here is going to talk about this stuff, so we're not diving into it much today. But obviously for us as well, like especially in that agent world, how do we surf up these recommendations in a way that is simple for them to read, to interpret? And we've done some initial metadata creation on like our feature store using LLMs, and also looking at whether we integrate to creative content suites. So where we do the prompting, and we're able to kind of create creative at scale, because that becomes a real bottleneck for us as we're testing. So none of this could have been done without people. And I think we've asked a lot of our people, and we've seen their roles change a lot as well. So one of the first things we did as part of our kind of journey to Agile was setting up cross-functional squads, which is really interesting because it essentially put our technical teams at the core of the problems they were trying to solve. So rather than getting a request tossed across the fence, making something, sending it back, they got to work in amongst the domain where they were delivering solutions, which led to far better solutions. And I think from the business side, having people like a marketer in the squad meant they were co-designing the solution, which helped with both adoption and the quality of the product. Cross-functional squads, good. And we've also really evolved and we're still evolving our skill sets. So if we look at where we were in 2020, we had quite a traditional sort of set of what we call as chapters, but disciplines. So the first one was data, where we've seen obvious change has been data engineering. So our data engineers have kind of gone on this journey to cloud, as we have obviously, and they've been a big part of that. And so kind of got to the point over the last year where we've actually formally recognized that now, where we have a cloud engineer specialty. We have a cloud architect specialty, which recognizes that those skills have evolved. And looking back to 2020 as well, we had a data science practice, but it was small. And so that's kind of changed in two ways. Firstly, it's scaled up hugely. But also it's really become more mature in the way it develops models. So we're not, to start with, it might be someone's using a Jupyter notebook or something like that and building models or running them off their local machine, which probably isn't unusual, to the point now we've got a full kind of DevOps practice around how we develop and deploy models, which has led to this new specialization of ML engineering, machine learning engineering. And the third one we had in 2020 was data analytics. So really focused on sort of data visualization, report build, dashboard build, the usual things you would see from a service-based team. And what we said is, hey, we have a bunch of people and also a need for people who can get into the business, really understand the commercial drivers, and help then work with the data teams to design and deliver really meaningful products. So that was what we call commercial data team. And then that in itself too has certainly changed in the last couple of years. So we set that up in 2021. And just recently we've moved some of our people into data product engineering, which is a sort of a subspecialty of that, which is, this is people that we want that have UI, UX experience, that are product designers. Some of them are even full stack developers. But how do we find a home for them and recognize that skill? Because it is not a traditional analytics skill. And lastly, if we're building these things and we don't want them to sit in a silo, we want them all to work together, there needs to be really considered design overall for how those products work together. So we've introduced the data product architect role as well. Cool. So if we double click on that sort of data science teams and the way they've changed, like I said, when we were in a few years ago now, we had 3 or 4 models at any given time. Those models had a pretty short lifespan. 2 months might even be generous. I think it was 1 execution and done. Used by a single business unit, so they're just using our marketing tribe, and very limited visibility across, even within that tribe, but certainly across the organization. If we fast forward a little bit, there's a big change in scale in a couple of years. So we identified a lot of use cases around churn, around moments of truth for our customers, and that drove a lot of that. We started to get better at keeping those things going for a while and improving them rather than using them and ditching them. We also got projects across some other business units, so we expanded into both network and product parts of the business. And what we increasingly saw as well was, as our internal users started to understand these things, they wanted to know how they worked, not just that they worked or what they output. And where we are today, so we've got 80 plus models in production. Those models now have 2-year at least lifetime, with kind of constant development and improvement on the top rather than changing. And we've got projects across the organization, which Kalal's going to touch on in a bit. And we've got a lot more transparency and audit capabilities. So we're looking at things like fairness and bias to make sure that we're kind of doing these things in a way that's transparent. So yeah, early days we focus on how do we scale this. Then it was about transparency, and today it's about collaboration and how we bring people on that journey. So in terms of we've probably learned a lot along the way, but in terms of what we learned, I think initially having that leadership buy-in was super vital for us. It gave us a kind of bubble to experiment in, as well as kind of access to the resources that we needed to drive it. And as well, take that profit center view of the world really meant that our teams sort of saw themselves as little entrepreneurial teams that cared about what the value of their products was, not just about what they cost. Building privacy and AI for us from the start was really important. We work in a regulated industry, and what we couldn't have was to build a car and then need to build seatbelts later on, because that was going to slow us down, and we've got a legal team that wouldn't get it at all. Next was around minimum viable data. So we sort of touched on the data quality in the app, but we knew our data in places wasn't great. So what we kind of said is what we need to do is identify use cases that are going to get a real commercial benefit. And then based on those use cases, let's find out what's the least amount of good data we can have to deliver on those. And then we can build on that. Like Klaus said as well, we're down the bottom of the world. We're next to Antarctica. We can't do it all ourselves. So finding the right set of partners was really important. Obviously, Snowflake's been a big part of that for us. Creating a sense of purpose in our teams as well. So making sure they were kind of pulling all in the right direction to build these products. And lastly, for us, was about just starting. I think the risk of failure has kind of always been a big one, especially for us, we're a big company in New Zealand. Worldwide, maybe not, but I think the risk of standing still outweighed the risk of failing for us, especially as our environment changed.
I guess in this, there is one question we generally ask ourselves, and probably get asked also, is how do you start? Like, it's a lot. You move into the new ways of working, data, and that minimum viable data is very important in terms of understanding what slice to take. You don't have to solve the whole problem together. You can start with a slice, which is the most meaningful, but would generate its value. And that's probably got us started. Now, where are we going next with this? So we did, what you saw was the strategy for last 3 years. Now we refreshed our strategy recently. And as part of the strategy, the next is, I will explain what this is, but essentially the tagline is data-driven everywhere. So essentially take data to all parts of the business. So what are we doing right now is, you saw the personalized marketing example. We're taking this to the B2B for both operational efficiency as well as increasing our engagement with our customers and sales. We are taking that same capability into the retail part of the business. So there is a part around our channels and how they interact with using data, but there is also around optimization of our retail channels. And this is where we see a lot of the generative AI impact also driving in terms of the future use cases which will come up in terms of making the retail channel showing up for our customers. Now, as Tenco, we have large network and we invest a lot in network technology. And we are essentially marrying the network data with our customer household data to plan the network and also find the right offers based on the understanding of customer behavior as well as network experience needed at that point of time. Now, this cycle is not full unless we talk about the support systems, including finance, as well as workforce management and forecasting, which is very dynamic as we saw in COVID, and it's continuing very dynamic as we go with the disruptive technologies coming our way. There's a focus of using AI and data to help those parts of the business to plan better. And all this needs a different layer of governance. We published a principle called AI ethics principle, which is around explainability of models so that we can explain why they made the decision. Then transparency of the models to show how they made the decision, as well as tooling to understand bias or fairness, and bringing that together with the concepts like human in the loop so that we have some human responsible for the AI. But that will be a very vital part of the whole model still today. So now the next set of ambition, data-driven everywhere. So the idea is in the next few years, we not only build this, but utilize the disruptive and the enabling technologies like the ones you are hearing every day around large language models and other AI inventions, which we think will come in the next few years. But they will need to solve business problems. And this probably gives a context of where we want to focus in terms of business to create the data-driven enterprise view and work with all the technologies which will come our way using our unsiloed cloud architecture stack. So we end here.
Thank you.